Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today we're taking a dense sociological chapter on Indian social institutions and translating it into a really clear visual journey. We're focusing heavily on the continuity and change of the caste system. If you've ever wondered how an ancient social arrangement manages to survive, adapt, and basically transform itself across thousands of years, right up into our modern era, well, you are absolutely in the right place. We're going to unpack exactly how that happens.
Here's our roadmap for today. 1. The origins of caste. 2. The 6 rules of caste. 3. Colonial codification. 4. The reformers. And 5. Caste in modern India. Let's get right into it.
All right, Section 1, the origins of caste.
To really grasp where we are today, we first have to look way back at the ancient roots of an institution that is uniquely associated with the Indian subcontinent. So the absolute crucial point here is understanding the difference between two terms, Varna and Jati. It's actually pretty fascinating. Did you know the English word caste comes from the Portuguese word casta, which means pure breed? But in ancient Sanskrit, the whole setup is described by these two distinct terms instead. Varna literally translates to color, and it refers to a very broad, 3,000-year-old fourfold division of society. But here's the catch. This Varna system actually left out a massive chunk of the population. We're talking foreigners, slaves, and outcasts, who are sometimes called the Panchamas, or the fifth category. On the flip side, we have Jati. This is a much more localized, generic term that basically means species or kinds. While Varna is the same across all of India, the Jati hierarchy is strictly regional, and it's incredibly complex, consisting of hundreds, sometimes even thousands of specific subcastes. And it's Jati that Indians actually use to describe caste today.
But how do you go about ranking thousands of different jatis? Well, the entire hierarchical ordering of this system boils down to this fundamental distinction between purity and pollution. That is what dictates a high or low social status. Theoretically, the whole system is built on two concepts, difference and hierarchy. Every single caste is strictly separated from the others. But they don't just exist in a vacuum, they're all part of this whole ladder-like societal structure. Those believed to be closer to the sacred are considered ritually pure, so they get to occupy the top of the ladder. Those associated with tasks that are distant from the sacred, they're deemed polluting and placed at the very bottom. And you know, as the source text points out, just like in pretty much any society, this ritual status was actually very closely tied to raw material wealth and military power.
Moving on to Section 2, 6 Rules of Caste. Let's look at how all this theory actually played out in real life. Interestingly, back in the earliest Vedic period, we're talking roughly 900 to 500 BC, the system was actually somewhat fluid. Moving across categories is fairly common. But in the post-Vedic period, the entire institution just froze. It hardened into a rigid system defined by 6 specific rules. First, membership became entirely determined by birth. No choices, no leaving. Second, you were restricted to marrying strictly within your own group, which is a practice known as endogamy. Third, there were incredibly strict rules dictating exactly what food you could eat and, crucially, who you were allowed to share it with. Fourth, everything was arranged in that strict hierarchy we talked about. Fifth, it had a segmental organization, meaning those complex subcastes. And sixth, occupation was entirely hereditary. Literally, if you were born into a caste of weavers, you wove. End of story. No other caste could take your job, and you sure couldn't take theirs. It was a completely static system of labor that locked people into a strict social division, making upward mobility basically impossible in principle.
Which brings us to Section 3, colonial codification.
Let's jump ahead to the colonial period, because the British administration fundamentally changed the nature of caste. When the British arrived, they naturally wanted to understand this incredibly complex system so they could govern more efficiently. So they started running these intensive surveys. But the real turning point is right there in the middle of our timeline, the 1901 census under a man named Herbert Risley. Now, Risley didn't just want to count people. He decided he wanted to officially record the exact social rank of every single caste. And the reaction was wild. Suddenly, hundreds of petitions came flooding in from different castes claiming a higher historical status. They were literally trying to get the British government to officially upgrade them. Before this census, caste identities actually had some local fluidity. But once they were officially recorded in a British bureaucratic document, they took on a rigid life of their own. This whole process of official codification ultimately culminated in the 1935 Act, which legally grouped the most discriminated castes at the bottom of the hierarchy into the scheduled castes, a legal designation we still use today.
Next up, Section 4, the Reformers. Now, obviously, these deeply oppressive structures did not just go unchallenged. We're going to look at some of the progressive reformers who led mass mobilizations against caste inequality. And this slide brilliantly illustrates the tandem efforts of a real power couple, Jyotirao Phule and Savitribai Phule. Operating in Western India during the 19th century, Jyotirao fiercely denounced the injustice of the whole system and openly scorned those rules of purity and pollution. He actually founded the Truth Seeker Society, which was completely devoted to securing basic human rights for low-caste people. And Savitribai Phule was an absolute pioneer. She devoted her life to educating marginalized groups, including starting the first school for girls in Pune. She even opened a night school for agriculturists and laborers, and tragically, she ultimately died while selflessly serving plague patients. Together, they really set the stage for a nationwide awakening.
Heading down to the south, specifically Kerala, we have Ayan Kali. He fought absolutely fiercely against the extreme spatial segregation that the purity rules had created. Because of his monumental leadership, lower castes and Dalits fought for the basic right to simply walk on public roads, and for Dalit children to finally be allowed to join schools. Also in Kerala, Srinarayana Guru led what you could call a quiet revolution. He famously advocated the philosophy of one caste, one religion, one God for all men. His approach was a deeply philosophical and social movement, and its goal was to completely dismantle the spiritual justifications that propped up the entire caste hierarchy. Meanwhile, Periyar spearheaded a massive rationalist movement in South India. He was out there waking people up to the simple fact that it is the birthright of every single individual to enjoy liberty and equality. He pushed back incredibly hard against the traditional dogmas that had kept the lower castes subordinated for centuries. What all of these reformers really proved to us is that the pushback against caste came very strongly from the lower castes themselves, long before the nationalist independence movement even gained full steam.
Finally, Section 5, Caste in Modern India.
So think about this. What actually happens after Indian independence in 1947, when the new constitution explicitly abolishes caste distinctions? Well, post-independence India brought some very rapid economic and social shifts. Sociologist M.N. Srinivas coined a fascinating term, Sanskritization, to explain one of the main ways people tried to navigate and climb this deeply ingrained hierarchy in modern times. Because, look, the Constitution abolished caste legally, right? But society still heavily felt its weight culturally. So middle and lower castes would purposefully adopt the domestic, social, and ritual practices of higher status castes to try and command more respect on that social ladder.
Srinivas also identified another crucial dynamic, the dominant caste. He showed how post-independence land reforms fundamentally shifted power away from upper caste absentee landlords, handing it over to populous middle-tier farming castes. This is a massive economic shift. The upper caste, who often lived in the cities and basically just collected rent, suddenly lost their rural land rights. Those rights transferred to the next layer down, the castes that were actually working the agricultural economy day in and day out, and who had the sheer population numbers to back up their new political power. Now, you might think that rapid urbanization and modern industry would just shatter these old barriers. And sure, cities and busy factories made strict social segregation nearly impossible. You can't enforce purity rules on a crowded public bus. But despite all that, caste proved incredibly resilient in two major areas. The first is endogamy. People today still primarily marry within their own caste. The second is modern electoral politics. You see, the modern Indian state tried to act caste blind, except for specific reservations. So where did caste survive? It survived in the private sphere by heavily policing marriage boundaries and in the highly public, democratic sphere. Ever since the 1980s, caste has become absolutely central to electoral calculus, to the point where we see the emergence of explicitly caste-based political parties. The system didn't disappear, folks, it just adapted. I want to leave you with this final, truly provocative paradox from the chapter. Why is it that caste has seemingly become invisible to the urban upper classes? Well, for the groups who benefited the most from post-colonial developmental policies, caste seems to have disappeared simply because it has already done its job for them. Think about it. They already had the historical advantages of education and wealth.
So when the modern state stepped in and started offering jobs based strictly on merit, without considering historical caste disadvantages, the upper classes naturally succeeded. Because they don't face daily discrimination, they often view caste as just a thing of the past. But as we've seen throughout this entire explainer, just because an institution changes its shape or becomes invisible to a certain group of people, doesn't mean it ceases to exist. It simply continues its long history of adaptation,